Well, we've been involved in Alzheimer's disease etiology, so causes and pathophysiological consequence of the disease for almost 25 years. And in recent years, we moved to understanding the genetics, the mechanism, to prevention, and created only 4 years ago the first Canadian research center on Alzheimer's disease prevention. Well, having been a geneticist now for nearly 25 years, I have to admit that the recent progress with molecular aspects of Alzheimer's disease have been of tremendous impact, especially in recent years with the availability, but the cost that's coming down with genetic technology that's given us opportunities that we never thought we would have in that field. And the combination of genetics with biomarkers, which is this novel emerging fields, make the study of Alzheimer's disease now feasible in the context of prevention, which would have never happened 5 years ago. I would say, in combination with genetic, the recent advances in biomarkers have tremendously changed how we look at disease. The notion of prevention of Alzheimer's disease or prevention of Parkinson's disease didn't make any sense just 10 years ago. Now, with not only the sensitivity, but the quality of the technology that we have, we can detect minute amount of extremely rare proteins, both in biological fluids, but also in combination with imaging. We find relevant associations with was essentially not possible 3-4 years ago. So I think biomarkers not only give us complementary information, but they're now part of the whole assessment where, as I said, we combine genetics, imaging, and biomarker together to get a real good picture at what the disease is and how it evolves in time, either before the onset of the disease or after the onset of the disease. Well, I think the biomarker field has matured enough now that it is commonly used in research. I would say not only in curiosity-driven research projects, but I can tell you in Montreal, we're using these biomarkers as part of the JPND initiative within our prevention trial, which are the first 2 trials in Canada to be performed with subjects who have no signs of Alzheimer, but have a familial history of the disease. So if it's ready prime time for prevention research, I guess it's prime time ready also for clinical use. Now, there's the other side of the coin, which is the acceptance by physician of using lumbar puncture and these other biomarkers in the context of clinical research and regular clinical duties, which will require more work. Imaging is getting there, cost is going down. And genetic technology is the same. It used to be very expensive to sequence a whole genome. Now we can do it for $1,500. So it's becoming affordable and it makes sense to use the technology. The most important, I would say, impact of having brought together the people within Biomark ADPD is not only to have created a critical mass of scientists with very complementary knowledge and expertise. As I said before, we have geneticists working with biomarker experts, working with clinicians, working with imagers, and neuropsychological specialists. And the same is true on the Parkinson side. So bringing all these areas of expertise together is one major step forward. Now, to have them only talk in using hypothetical approaches, but in making it happen for real, collecting samples, analyzing data, interacting, having seen geneticists interacting with clinicians, which is quite surprising these days, we see clearly the development of a new approach to not only understand the disease before it shows up, but also now that it shows up, how it could be handled, how it could be treated. We are facing today a tremendous challenge. We've been building Alzheimer research worldwide around 1 or 2 central hypotheses which are collapsing. And we need better ideas, more creativity. And this is precisely what these organizations such as Biomark AD is providing us. It's this creative movement that we desperately need now. Well, the Canadian contribution has been at several levels. We came in the game a little bit late because we were setting up our prevention centers. But eventually, we desperately needed the technology, but more like the knowledge and the expertise in biomarker bioassay development. So we provided samples from our prevention trials. We've been involved in the validation of some of the studies, the biomarker studies, measurements, reliability studies. And we are now involved also in a longitudinal study that involves different stages of Alzheimer's. So samples from control subjects with familial story, MCI, eventually Alzheimer's. So we'll be bringing information about a certain level of complexity in that whole story, which by ourselves we could never do because we don't have the samples to cover the whole spectrum. But together we're going to be able to do that. Well, if I have to give advice to young scientists getting in or early in their career, don't feel isolated. You are now part of a research endeavor that's more exciting than it's never been before because the technology is there, the know-how is there, but one thing that's crucial, you have to link with people. You cannot work in isolation like in the old days where you had the Nobel Prize for something you discovered in your basement. Nowadays, you have to be part of a team. You got to work with people. Clinicians have to work with basic scientists. You have to work the whole spectrum to understand disease, especially in the central nervous system. And as long as you do that, success will be there. Well, I would be very frank with you. I mean, the fact we have been able to bring in Canada not only the know-how, but the technology. And now we are the center that has been using validated technology. We were happy to find out last fall that we were receiving a $30 million grant to build a Canadian consortium to study different aspects of neurodegenerative disease. And surprisingly, they called us to take over the biomarker characterization of the whole consortium. So without the knowledge and the expertise which we imported from Europe to Canada in order to be able to do these measurements in a validated and well-controlled manner, we would not have been the reference center in Canada. And there would have been a big hole in this whole process. So we are now the reference lab to do that, but for the Canadian consortium. Well, I would say it finally demonstrates that if you do bring together people with very different expertise level, different understanding of the disease, that they can and they should talk with one another. Now, we've been putting together these infrastructure, these samples, these biobanks, which we've never been able to achieve in the past. So we've done it on a small scale, and everybody had their little private collections, and nobody was looking at the big pictures. Now we can do that big science approach. The brain is complicated. It will take time. Imaging is possible and allow us to see certain aspects of the disease, but we need the biochemical measurements as well as we do with the genetic measurements. So the complementary nature of all these research approaches is just fabulous, and definitively it's being used and now imported everywhere in the world, and it's in part due to biomarker AD.